Does the Horror Icon Hall of Fame have room for one more killer clown? What is up, guys? Welcome to my review of Clown in a Cornfield, the brand new slasher film that is also an adaptation of a novel by author Adam Caesar, and potentially could be the kickoff to a brand new slasher franchise, depending on how successful this movie is. Now, I was able to check out this film back in March in Austin, Texas at the South by Southwest premiere. I think that was actually the world premiere of the movie, but it's releasing wide in theaters this week. So as I said, Clown in a Cornfield is a series of books. I believe there's 3 of them at the moment, and this is an adaptation of the first book, where the basic premise is you have a father and a daughter that move to this town called Kettle Springs in Missouri. And as they are kind of indoctrinating themselves into this town and getting into all the traditions, there is a killer clown named Friendo, which is essentially the town's mascot, if you will, that starts to murder all of the teenagers. It's a very straightforward setup, and I will say this is a movie that if you're a slasher fan and you like a lot of the tropes and the more traditional approach to a slasher film with maybe some room to have some subversion, some different expectations thrown in there, then this is the type of movie for you. And I'm going to get a little bit more into it, but this is a film that I do think is going to be very entertaining for a lot of slasher fans, but it's going to live or die based on your expectations. And the reason why I lead with that is because anytime you get a film that premieres at a film festival, there tends to be, if it's well received, a lot of extra hype behind it. There's a lot of hyperbole out there. The select few amount of people in the world that get to experience a world premiere, if they enjoy the movie, it is such a heightened experience where you're there with the stars, you're there with the director, you've got Friendo the clowns walking through the theater, the crowd itself inside of the theater while the movie is playing is much more lively and expressive than most of your regular theater crowds in your local town. And so ever since March, I have seen a lot of language being used to describe this film, and to the likes of Friendo being the brand new horror icon, and the main character here, Quinn, the brand new final girl, and Clown in a Cornfield is the new premier slasher franchise starring a killer clown. And look, I understand some people aren't Terrifier fans and some people aren't It fans, but my whole point of this is, one, calm down a bit. let's let time see who actually gets to go into the horror icon pantheon and things like that. But 2, a lot of times when you get these types of hyperbolic reactions out of a film festival, I think it unfairly sets most people's expectations way too high. So even people that would really enjoy this movie and have a good time with it are going to walk in expecting something that is so high level, so instantly iconic, that even if they enjoy themselves, they're going to walk out inherently disappointed. So that's the main thing I want to say first off, is that don't walk into this film expecting the next horror icon or the next slasher franchise to redefine slasher franchises. Just walk in expecting a really fun, gory, killer clown film. And with that being said, let's talk about Clown in a Cornfield. Starting off with the positives, I think this is a very good balance of horror and comedy, which I don't often see. I think I've said that a number of times this year. Like 2025 seems to be the year of the horror comedy resurgence, and I am totally here for it. You know, so far this year, we've had things like Companion, we've had Hard Eyes, we've had The Monkey, we've got Clown in a Cornfield, of course, we've got Hell of a Summer. Like every month feels like there's 1 or 2 horror comedies. And I think this is one of the ones that balances that tone the best. This is brought to you by the director Eli Craig, who is most famously known for Tucker and Dale vs. Evil, which is a horror comedy classic in most people's eyes. And he brings a lot of those sensibilities over here, where he does not shy away from the horror. He does not shy away from the gore and the intensity and the tension, but he absolutely takes his moments to have really good, solid situational or dialogue-based comedy. And there's a number of points in this film where you get the carnage that you want, but you also have a really solid laugh. You know, one of the main themes that's kind of going throughout this film is generational differences, where you have the adults in the towns who are very much like the stereotypical boomers, if you will, and then all of the kids, most of our main characters and protagonists, are all like the Gen Z kids. And I think that they play up kind of the faults and the strengths of both generational outlooks to a really funny degree here. And so not only do you get a lot of good situational humor there with that generational divide, but you'll get things like the Gen Z kids not knowing how to use a piece of technology that was very prominent in the 80s and 90s.
Call 911.
Where's the button, Jen? What is this?
What kind of phone is this?
Those of us that were alive during that time, you see these scenes and you get a very good guttural reaction out of that. So this is a film that I think is just genuinely a really fun time. And if you like slashers and you like the carnage, you like the intensity of what the more serious slashers bring, you're going to get a good amount of that, but you're going to have a lot of fun along the way. I can't get too specific with this, but one of the biggest strengths of this film is its subverting expectations. And I'll talk a little bit more about this in the negative side, but the first half or so of this film is very conventional. It's very traditional slashers. It's filled with tropes. It has a very basic setup and caricatures. And so even though I was having fun during that section, I was like, okay, well, so it's a killer clown movie. And then something happens at some point that really flips this movie on its head, and suddenly Clown in a Cornfield really comes to life. It suddenly carves its own path, and it gives you all the reasons why this is something to be excited for and something to really have a good time with, because it is very different with where things go in the back half. And so I really did enjoy how it subverted my expectations in that way, as well as just in my expectations as the film was going on, where I kind of settled into a little bit of disappointment of, oh, I wish this had a little bit more going for it. And then all of a sudden, it's got a lot going for it. And it was just made for a really fun experience, especially at a film festival and a film festival crowd, I got to be honest. Now, as I said, we get plenty of carnage here. I'm a carnage whore. Carnage candy is my drug of choice. And so you have a lot of really solid kills here. Now, there's a number of them that I would say are pretty traditional kills with pretty traditional weapons. And you think Clown in a Cornfield, you can go ahead and assume things like pitchforks and scythes are going to be used here, and they are. But you get a number of them that are pretty cool and pretty creative, you know, one involving a weight bench. And I think that's just a very important element for modern slashers to have. Like, you want to have a bit of a classic appeal there, but you got to push things forward somehow. You either got to give us one or two really cool, nasty kills we haven't seen, or you have to give us something like a signature weapon that we haven't seen for your main killer. And I think they take moments to kind of achieve both of those here. So if you go to your slasher films for carnage, you'll be happy with this one. I also like the look of Friendo the Clown. Now, having a clown horror character is very difficult because you have things like Pennywise that have been kind of the iconic clown character for decades. And then here more recently, we have Art the Clown, who's kind of risen to be the more popular one and for today's era. And so it's a very, I won't say it's a flooded market, but it's a very competitive market where, like, what can you actually do to a clown design to make him stand out amongst Pennywise and Art the Clown? And I think they did a pretty good job at taking a very classic approach to the look of this clown, that his look is not inherently creepy. It's the way that they execute him. It's the setting that he's in. It's the thing that he's doing. And so I think there was just enough about the way that they've designed the look of the character Friendo and how they utilize him in the movie that he does have icon potential. You have to give a couple of movies, like if we get Clown in a Cornfield 2 and especially Clown in the Cornfield 3, and they're really successful, and over time people really have a nice following for this film, he's got icon potential. I don't think he's the character that we could say one and done, he's on Mount Rushmore, like a lot of people like to do with a new horror icon, but I like the character of Friendo. He's got potential. And I also enjoy the other characters in the film. We have Quinn here, who is our new final girl, who's, you know, the rough around the edges girl who moves into this agricultural little podunk town. And so she's very much fish out of water, but kind of indoctrinates into this crowd very quickly. We do get a lot of caricatures with these kids where you got like the douchebag jock, you've got the prom queen character, you got the nerd character, but they're entertaining. You know, they're not caricatures that are annoying and basic and we don't follow them with any sort of character development at all. They kind of play their place in the tone of the film. And so especially Quinn and even her father, who is, you know, somebody who is mingling more with the adults, obviously, but is very much a fish out of water himself. I liked them as leads for this film. And I think Quinn is a character that definitely holds her own as being the final girl here. And then you get other side characters that are fun actors as well, like Kevin Durand, who I love, and I actually got a chance to meet him at the premiere. Super cool guy. And his character is a lot of fun as like the mayor of the town. Some other side characters and some other more comedic actors in here too. So as a cast of characters on both sides, the adults and the kids, I thought it was a fun group. Moving on to the mix, and I cannot get very specific with this, but by the climax of the film, given that this is a film that's intended to become a franchise, given that the novels that it is adapting is already a franchise, there's certain amounts of dangling threads that are left at the end that obviously are intended to be picked up later on if we get a sequel to this film. And so you don't really have the frustration of thinking you're not going to get that paid off because you figure you probably will later on. And I assume this movie will be successful enough to at least get a second film. But there's a frustration in how it doesn't really have this sense of closure or enough of a sense of finality in the way that they close out this first film and this first chapter of the story. And so some of these dangling plot threads really feel like they just kind of get cut off and dispensed from the movie in the last 10 minutes. So as the credits roll, you're like, what? Well, that was weird. Like, I understand where we're going to go with that. I understand that that's left there by intention, but it feels like there could have been a smoother way to do that. And now moving on to the negatives, and kind of piggybacking off of something that I mentioned earlier in the positives, the first half or so of this film is very traditional slasher. It's very conventional. It's very cliche. It's very much running through the template that we've seen dozens and dozens of other movies go through. And I think that the benefit of that, as I said, is that it does set you up to have your expectations subverted by where things go in the back half. But I still think that leaves the first half feeling like it really lacks some punch. It feels like the first half is something you have to kind of get through to get to the meat of the movie and the exciting part of the film. And I think that would even hurt rewatchability for a little bit. And God forbid people that watch this on a streaming service, maybe some of them are going to be so unimpressed in the first half that they turn it off and don't get to the exciting back half. So I wish there was some things they could have done to insert a little bit more life, a little bit more juice into the first half, something that makes the clown in a cornfield really stand on its own from the get-go instead of, later on when the plot develops things. I just wish they balanced that a little bit better. I also really didn't care too much for the conclusion of the film in regard to the reveals, as far as the, identity of the killer, motive of the killer, the whole plot of what is going on. I feel like the movie is much more fun when you're watching the chaos go down versus when it's explaining the chaos. And, there's something in there that I get what they're going for, and maybe it's better executed in the novel. But when you get to the point where you're starting to get to the Scooby-Doo villain moment, it just feels like there's not enough there. It feels like a little bit of a letdown. Like, oh, really? That's what we're doing here? Okay. It's by no means something that ruins the movie. It's by no means something that I disliked. It was just a bit of a disappointment where by the time I've got to this point in the film, my expectations have been subverted in such a really fun and exciting way. Then when you get to the motives and you're like, oh, I kind of saw that coming. I wish there was something a little bit more surprising in store. And there's just an inherent disappointment with that. But overall, guys, I had a good time with this one. I think it's a fun slasher. I think most genre fans will enjoy this depending on their expectations. It's got a good mix of horror and comedy, and it's got a lot of potential for a nice little franchise and possibly some icon status for one or more of its characters. We're just not there yet. So, dug it. Check it out in theaters. I think you'll have a good time. Well, that's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed that, please click over here for all of my 2025 new release reviews. I'm also going to put my ranking of all 25 or so movies I saw at South by Southwest up here for you to check out. Like, share, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss everything in the future. And as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.